It was supposed to be a simple visit to the bank, a quick errand before the biggest business deal of the year. Mr. Harold Thompson, an 82-year-old retired professor, walked in with nothing but a smile and his ID in hand. What he didn't know was that his son, Jamal Thompson, a self-made billionaire CEO, was minutes away from finalizing a $5 billion international tech deal. Everything was lined up, but what happened inside that bank would send shockwaves through Wall Street and leave one major institution in crisis control. As Mr. Thompson handed over his ID to the young bank manager, expecting the usual routine, something snapped. Maybe it was unconscious bias. Maybe it was something deeper. But instead of verifying the ID, the manager tossed it onto the floor right at the elderly man's feet. No explanation, no apology, just cold silence. Other customers froze. Security stayed still. The quiet disrespect hit harder than words ever could. What the manager didn't realize: cameras were rolling. And more importantly, that man wasn't just anybody. He was the father of the man about to invest billions into the same bank's future. One phone call. That's all it took for everything to start unraveling. So how did a single act of arrogance cost a Fortune 500 bank one of the biggest deals of the decade? And what did Jamal Thompson do when he found out how his father was treated? The answer will leave you speechless. Jamal Thompson wasn't just another CEO. He built his empire from scratch, starting with a small coding business in his college dorm and growing it into one of the most trusted names in global fintech. The $5 billion deal he was about to sign wasn't just about money. It was about creating opportunities, investing in underserved communities, and partnering with banks that aligned with his values. That's why he chose this bank, reputable, stable, with a legacy of community outreach. Or so he thought. As he waited in the corporate suite upstairs, final contract in hand, his assistant rushed in, pale and breathless. "Sir, your father." Something happened downstairs. Jamal's phone buzzed. A video was already going viral. It showed his father, calm, respectful, standing quietly just before the manager tossed the ID. The sound of the plastic card hitting the floor echoed in the clip. So did the silence that followed. Jamal didn't yell. He didn't storm out. But his expression changed. He stood up slowly, took off his blazer, and made one phone call to his legal team, then another to his board. The room, moments ago filled with smiles and champagne glasses, went quiet. In a world where public image can make or break a business, the question wasn't just about dignity anymore. It was about what this act revealed behind the scenes. Was this just one rude manager, or a symptom of something bigger within the bank's culture? That decision would define everything Jamal did next. Back downstairs, Harold Thompson quietly picked up his ID without saying a word. He was no stranger to moments like this. Decades of subtle slights and quiet dismissals had taught him not to react. But this one stung deeper, not because of the action itself, but because of how normal it felt to everyone around. The security guard looked away. The teller behind the glass froze, but said nothing. A woman in line pulled out her phone, recording only after the ID hit the floor. The manager, unaware of who he had just insulted, turned his back and walked away as if nothing had happened. Upstairs, Jamal began asking questions. Has this manager had complaints before? How does the bank handle internal bias training? His team started digging. What they found only raised more alarms. There had been prior incidents, quiet settlements, flagged customer experiences, internal memos left unanswered. The manager wasn't just a one-time problem. He was a symptom of a system that preferred silence over accountability. Meanwhile, investors were calling. Some had already seen the video, others wanted answers. A senior board member even suggested ignoring the situation until things cooled down. "We can handle this with a private apology," they said. But Jamal knew better. This wasn't a PR issue. This was personal. This was legacy. As media outlets picked up the story and hashtags began trending, the pressure mounted from all sides. Still, Jamal hadn't made his final move. The bank was waiting. The world was watching. And the silence before his response grew louder by the second. The pressure inside the bank's executive floor was boiling. Jamal stood at the window, staring down at the street where camera crews had already started to gather. His father sat quietly in a chair nearby, still calm, still silent. The video had now hit 1 million views, shared by influencers, activists, and even celebrities. Headlines read, "Billionaire CEO's father disrespected at bank, $5 billion deal in jeopardy over one ID." The bank's PR team scrambled to draft statements. Executives argued behind closed doors, desperate to control. But Jamal wasn't talking. Not yet. Behind the scenes, pressure came from all directions. The board begged him to stay at the table. A rival bank called discreetly, offering better terms, no questions asked. Civil rights organizations began tagging him, urging him not to let this slide. His phone kept buzzing, but he ignored every call except one from his mother. "Son," she said, her voice soft, "how you respond now will speak louder than any deal you ever sign." Meanwhile, the manager who tossed the ID had been placed on immediate leave, but that wasn't enough. Internal documents were leaked, past complaints, patterns of mistreatment, missed red flags. One former employee, shared how they had once tried to raise the same concerns, only to be silenced. The clock was ticking. The deal team sat in the conference room, waiting to finalize what was supposed to be a historic partnership. But now, everyone was watching one man Jamal Thompson, and with every passing second, the tension kept rising. Just as the boardroom grew restless and whispers filled the hallway, Jamal's legal advisor walked in with a folder, one that shifted the energy in the room completely. "You're going to want to see this," he said, sliding it across the table. Inside were records showing that the bank had known about the manager's conduct for over a year. Multiple customer complaints had been documented, mostly elderly clients, people of color, or those without high net worth accounts. Each report had been labeled "handled internally," but the signatures showed a clear pattern. Upper management had quietly signed off and moved on. Then came the twist no one saw coming. A whistleblower, an anonymous employee from the bank's internal compliance team, had just sent an email to Jamal's office. Attached was a video clip, never seen by the public, of a board member making inappropriate remarks about low-tier clients during a closed-door strategy meeting just weeks ago. The voice was clear, the tone was condescending, and one line stood out: "They come in thinking they're equals, but money talks, we choose who matters." Jamal froze, his fists clenched at his sides. This wasn't just about his father anymore. This was bigger. The bank hadn't just tolerated bias, it had embedded it deep in its culture. And now, there was proof. Back in the conference room, executives were still pushing for damage control, but Jamal was no longer listening. His silence had turned into strategy. And with this new information, the deal wasn't just on the line, so was the bank's entire future. Jamal finally walked into the boardroom. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to him as he set the whistleblower file on the table without a word. Then he reached for the contract, the one worth $5 billion, slowly tore it in half. Gasps filled the room. "This deal," he said, calmly, "was built on trust. You broke that before we even signed." A senior executive stood to protest, stammering about apologies and corrective action, but Jamal held up a hand. "This isn't about one manager, it's about a culture that quietly decides who's valuable and who's not. My father was disrespected, but this isn't just about him. This is about every person who walks into your branches and gets judged before they speak." The bank's CEO rushed in, clearly having just seen the leaked footage. He offered to fire the board member, donate to social causes, even renegotiate the deal. But Jamal had already made up his mind. He turned to his assistant. "Tell our legal team to finalize with Liberty Union Bank. They saw my father as a person first. That's the kind of institution we invest in." Just as he stepped out, another notification hit his phone. The whistleblower had gone public. The leaked video was now airing on national news. The stock price of the original bank was already dropping. But here came the twist. Jamal wasn't just ending a deal. He was launching his own financial network, built to serve the very people that bank had overlooked for years. The power had shifted, and, this time, it wasn't going back. Weeks later, the story was still trending. Headlines shifted from scandal to inspiration as Jamal Thompson officially announced the launch of his new financial network, Equitrust Capital. Focused on ethical banking, transparency, and equal access, it quickly became a rallying point for investors and everyday customers who had long felt left behind by traditional institutions. The $5 billion originally meant for one deal was now being used to create branches in underserved communities, fund scholarships, and support minority-owned startups. The bank that sparked it all? It issued a public apology, but the damage was done. Several executives resigned. The manager who disrespected Harold quietly vanished from public view. Their stock never fully recovered. As for Harold, he never once gave an interview. But cameras caught a quiet moment outside the first Equitrust